Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist in another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co-host is Alex Benesch in Germany, and we're going to be discussing the enemies of the West and what they're up to. And of course, this is the end of August. We're about to go into September when the Russians begin their exercise, Zapad 2025. The Russians have been engaged in building up their military. There's a story that all the tanks have disappeared from the Ukrainian front. Where have they been? Of course, the Russians are still producing tanks. Are they moving it to the borders of NATO? Are they moving it to the borders of the Baltic states? What's going on with that? And of course, we've got some lists of things that lists of things that indicate that an attack on the Baltic states or an invasion of the Savaki Gap may be about to happen. And then, Alex, you have some things about Peter Thiel and attempts of the Russians to infiltrate our tech billionaires. What have you got on that?
Well, it all is kind of tied together. I mean, because if you think about another Russian military action, another Russian incursion, they always need to have this perception, because perception to them is everything. I mean, any sort of dictatorship knows that those in power, they require these illusions that they are invincible, that they can do anything, or at least stay in power and they have the ultimate control, and there's nothing else. Nobody else could take any control in Russia. And so every dictatorship knows this. Once the perception, the public and international perception, once that is gone, usually the dictatorship is gone pretty soon thereafter. And that's why that's why having these sympathizers in the West, especially in those countries the Russians are about to invade or want to invade, having these sympathizers plays a big role. And they only have these sympathizers because of the illusion, because of the perception that life under Russian control would be better, or that Russia is bravely fighting the world conspiracy and is liberating countries from that grand world conspiracy. So it's not attacking somebody and controlling them. It's liberating them. It's always about perception, and the perception management, I think, was what made people in Russia decide to try the Ukrainian invasion, because they thought they would get away with it. And it's like when the Ukrainian invasion happened, the first few months, I mean, I saw a lot of people in Europe that used to be pro-Russia or somewhat, neutral towards Russia. I saw them freaking out. I saw them, just questioning everything and just being very, very shook. But then over the next few months and months and months and months, the illusion crept back in. The illusion that Russia was always going to win, and it's a foregone conclusion, and the Russians, they can overpower anybody, and it's just the way it is, and it's a good thing anyways, and just this illusion kept creeping back in. And so I think now when the Russians make this decision to attack another country, I think perception plays a huge factor. Who's going to sympathize with us in the country we're trying to take over, and other countries that are a factor in this, that could cause trouble for us.
I've been working with Johnny Anderson and Lee Wheelbarger on this satellite observation using on-ground cameras and various sources, even human sources of intelligence, to tell what's going on in Belarus and Russia in terms of preparing an invasion of NATO countries. And it's a very real thing. They've been stockpiling enormous quantities of petrol for tanks and armored personnel carriers. Chinese trains have come all the way from China to offload ammunition on the Polish border. They've got rail yards filled with trains, the trucks, military trucks stacked up on the borders, military trucks overfilling the carpools, tanks in their covered places, tanks and APCs, so you can't see exactly what they've got, but the buildings are overflowed, the airfields overflowed with Russian aircraft. I mean, this buildup is real, and Kaliningrad, airlifting troops into Kaliningrad, by the bucket load for months, especially accelerating it. And of course, they've just increased their satellite surveillance, air surveillance of Alaska. Here before August, Russia conducted 3 violations of Alaskan U.S. airspace. Now in the last 5 days, 4 of the last 5 days, they violated Alaskan's airspace, more than in the whole rest of the year. So the Russian activity is up. Their fleets are at sea. Many of their submarines, most of their submarine fleet is at sea. They're up to something. And of course, you have Venezuela mobilizing. I think this is the last day of their mobilization. Maybe it goes to tomorrow. And they're claiming they've got 4.5 million men with the Bolivarian militias. And of course, we have, Johnny Anderson and I and Lee, we found a mountain that the Russians have hollowed out. And it looks like a lot of Russian troops. There's a Russian base. It doesn't look like it's just anti-aircraft troops to us. It looks like there's a lot of Russian tanks in this base. There's a lot of heavy armor and of course, infrastructure. So, but here's what an observer, Dmitry Chernyshev, has written a post where he's outlined 10 signs that Russia is about to attack the Baltic states or the Savaki Gap. 1, in September 2025, joint Russian-Belarusian military exercises, a POD 2025, will take place, along with related drills. This is naval exercises he's talking about. In May 2025, Russian Baltic Fleet already conducted large exercises, and now new ones, the July storm ones, and I believe they're still continuing them. Number 3, on the front in Ukraine, almost all tanks have disappeared, yet the production and restoration continues, meaning they're being stockpiled somewhere or they're being deployed somewhere. Large field hospitals, fuel depots, and ammunition stores are being established in Belarus and Kaliningrad. Civil defense drills were conducted in Kaliningrad. Conscription is no longer seasonal. They had a big conscription in July here, the Russians did. Semi-official Telegram channels are being massively purged. Telegram is kind of a Russian channel area. Plans are underway to shut down WhatsApp, possibly even Telegram, forcing a switch to domestic messengers. This is closing it in Russia because they want to control communications absolutely there. Other symptoms of an imminent attack: a sharp increase in propaganda targeting Russian-speaking populations in the Baltics, accusing the Baltic peoples of genocide and discrimination or Nazism. Fake news about NATO preparing to attack Kaliningrad or stage a provocation in Belarusia. Possible truce in Ukraine. They spread these rumors, followed by rapid redeployment of Russian forces into Belarusia. No official mobilization, right? They're not officially saying we're mobilizing, but yet there's massive increase in draft notices in Russia. And look for heavier workloads in those offices. Large-scale cyber attacks on Baltic governments, banks, energy infrastructure. This is meant to create chaos or panic. Possible explosions at military depots. We saw an attempt last week. Yeah, it was last week because this is still Saturday of the same week. A Russian drone hit a power line deep in Poland on its way to Poland's biggest military ammunition depot. If that had reached the depot, it would have blown up that depot. That's an example. Special attention to Narva, Estonia. A Narva People's Republic could be proclaimed. So these are among the symptoms we're seeing indicating something's going to happen at either during or at the end of this Zapad exercise. I believe the exercise goes from like the 1st to the 7th, but they keep changing things. So I guess we'll see next week what it is. But any comments on this?
Yeah, it's about appearing to have the initiative. It's about this perception that Russia decides what's happening. It's not the Trump admin, it's not the Europeans, it's not the Ukrainians. Nobody else is deciding what's going to happen. It's Russia that's deciding what's going to happen. And they jump everybody. They surprise everybody, and they do what they want to do. And that impresses a lot of people that are very primitive in their thinking, that are very frustrated, and they believe this propaganda, this thought that you could reduce the complexity of the world. You could reduce the complexities of life and replace this annoying, frustrating complexity and replace it with simplicity. You have like this emperor Putin or whoever his replacement is going to be. We talked about those candidates in the last episodes. You have this dictator with a personality cult, a few other people, and you kind of know that it's a tight circle of moguls, and they own this business and that business and that business. Then there's a class of, government officials, police officers, blah blah blah, and then there's the rest of the people. And the government, the system tells you where you belong, what your status is, what are you going to work, how you live, what your life's going to be. So no more choices. You don't have to make any choices anymore. You don't have to be responsible for making these choices. You don't have to compare all these complex options in your life. It's going to be, or at least it's promised to be, very, very, very simplistic. I mean...
and you're talking about the attitude of Germans.
No, in general, it's like when people react to another Russian incursion, when people react or even help another Russian attack, in various ways. I mean, it's all about this promise of simplicity. We're gonna, the Russians are gonna take over these people, and the Russians are going to bring this simple, controlled life to these people. Whether it's part of the Ukraine or it's the Baltics or it's further into Poland, wherever, Russia is going to bring the simplicity. It's going to be like the God King, the priest class, the oligarchs, these business people, and everybody else is just peasants. And it's going to be simple. And also what I noticed which is a very strong psychological drive that people have, especially simple people who are either just below average intelligence, or they don't make use of their intelligence, they don't use their brain. They tend to believe, like in any cult, that you could have a decent place in the new hierarchy, in the new system, after a Russian takeover, that you can have your place by just repeating the ideology, by just saying what the system wants to hear. You don't have to live these values. You don't really have to be all that. But as long as you say it, you'll be fine. And there is a little bit of truth to that if, you look at these former communist states. The Baltics used to be communist for a while, under communist dictatorship, or let's say East Germany and Poland.
So what you're saying is they're taking away people's responsibility for their own lives, and there's a sense of relief for some people.
No, in the promise, not in the reality. The reality is going to be different. I mean, life is going to be very, very complex and complicated under this new tyranny. But the promise is that it's going to be simple. And this is how the Russian wars are going to be, or are being sold, right? And this is the sales pitch. This is this whole thing about the Baltics being under the control of the world conspiracy, or Poland or Germany. All these countries, they're all under this modern system, this conspiracy controlled system, and everything is super complex, and everybody is or half the people supposedly are now gay, and gender confusion and everything is overly complicated. Nothing is simple anymore. And here are the Russians, and they're going to bring you the simplicity. It's going to be a church, Jesus, a dictator. Men are going to be men, women are going to be women. You're going to have kids. You're going to make kids for the empire. That's it. That's that. And it's this promise that's working to a large degree, because it's not just when people say, or in their activism, in an organized fashion say, let's not punish the Russians. Let's not punish the Russians if they go and after they've gone into the Baltics.
Yeah, that would be mean, wouldn't it? It would be so mean.
That's not even the worst of it, and then creating this political pressure to not punish the Russians. I'm talking about when the Russians take the initiative and the Russians attack another place here in Europe. More people are going to feel emboldened to, just to create more problems for countries here in Europe. So it's going to be striking, blockading things, just destroying things, setting things on fire, overwhelming the security forces, because that's like the theme that I've been hearing for 10 years or 15 years. It's this idea that Berlin is easy to take, for example. Warsaw is easy to take. All these different countries are actually easy to take because they don't have a lot of police force. They don't have a lot of military force yet. And there's a number of people that are pro-Russia because they believe all this nonsense on the internet. And so there's like this idea that this Russian takeover could be done in a very quick fashion. It's not just slow-moving war like in Ukraine. It could be something really, really fast.
It could be something fast.
Yeah, if people feel emboldened, they might actually join something. If the Russians show the initiative, even though they can't really afford it and they have massive problems, if they show the initiative, that brings them this human capital, that brings them this cult effect on sympathizers in the West, and that's worth a lot to the Russians. That's I don't know how many boots on the ground that equals to, or how many souls that would bring into the Russian orbit, in a militant fashion.
It's interesting. Warfare is changing. I should mention Ivan Stupak, who's a Ukrainian commentator. He has made some statements backing up Chernyshev's points about Russia being about to go somewhere else. And he said, we Ukrainians know firsthand what joint exercises mean for us in 2022. That's when the Russian Zapad 2022 exercise became an invasion of Ukraine. He says, looking at statistics of Russian military losses, 3 things stand out: tanks, IFVs, and air defense systems. Since February 2025, losses in these categories, losses for the Russians, have dropped sharply. If tanks aren't being destroyed at the front, it means they're being held back. So he's confirming what Chernyshov is saying about tanks not being on the front. And he's pointing out that there's other armaments that are not on the Ukrainian front, that they must be putting them somewhere else. Another key point he makes during July storm drills, these are Baltic naval exercises of the Russians. He says, for the first time, they've tested unmanned surface vessels. That's unmanned surface war boats or whatever. They won't be used in the Black Sea, but Ukraine doesn't have a navy, but they're intended for the Baltic Sea because, of course, Sweden has a navy. Germany has somewhat of a navy. I think Poland has some ships, but certainly the British and the U.S. and the French can come into the Baltic. So the Russians seem prepared for some kind of action in the Baltic. They're getting ready for it. And of course, lastly, in July 2025, Estonian Interior Ministry reported a third problem area for Russian electronic warfare. Electronic warfare interference was long noted from St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad, but now a new hotspot has appeared just 20 kilometers from Narva. And that supports the idea that there's going to be something in Narva where there's some Russian population. So it's a real thing. They're gearing up. How, Alex, would the Germans react to a Russian push into the Slovakia Gap, cutting off the Baltic states? It would be an attack on NATO, an act of war. Already they committed an act of war on Poland, sending an armed drone into Poland to attack their big ammunition dump. These are acts of war. What do you think? Do you think people will go, oh, it's not really an act of war, it's a nothing, we don't care? What will Germans say?
No, I think this would be the final straw, because you can gauge what the people are thinking, and it's been done consistently through opinion research. And also you can scan, I mean, companies do that, private companies do that as well. You can scan social media for what people are thinking, how many people are even caring about the Ukraine war and geopolitics, and then you can just have all these databases now in these profiles, so you kind of get an idea of who could react in a certain way, and it's gonna be kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's gonna be the too much thing that happens, because for Germans, life has been, again, psychologically, it's been too complicated, right? Because there's so many life choices, you know, what do you work and your career, how much gonna you spend on your career, whom you're gonna marry, are you going to marry someone, or is this just a bad idea? Are you gonna have kids? When you have kids, your life becomes even more complicated, and then how you spend your free time, this could also get complicated, and then your living situation, if you live in a bigger city, there's super many migrants, things get everything gets complicated. If you have dealings with, anything with the government, that's complicated. So everything is just horrendously complicated. And then there's this additional complication with, climate change. Suddenly everything is more complicated. Even driving cars, complicated. Everything's complicated. So when the Russians did that attack against Ukraine, I think people in Germany and other places, even in the US, I think people were scared that life would become even more complicated. And the Russians, they played on this. They offered the simple solution. Just give us what we want. Just give us Ukraine, and life's going to be simple. We're just going to have what we need, and the Europeans are going to get their gas. We're going to sell them gas and oil. No issues, no problems, no trouble. Life will be simpler than it was before, or at least it's not going to be more complicated. And this is when people started to buy into this Russian pitch. Give the Russians what they want to make our life here more simple. But once they attack another place, once they attack the Baltics, for example, or Finland or whatever, once the Russians make the next step, then people in Germany and other places, and even the US, people will realize, no, the Russians will make our lives more complicated. They will go from place to place, and every time the Russians will get stronger because they get new people, they can raise new armies from these conquered people, and it's just going to be more complicated and more complicated and more complicated for us. So to make life more simple, or have the hope of a much simpler, safer life, now you gotta arm up, you gotta gear up, you gotta push back hard, and when politicians can deliver or facilitate new jobs, and the corporations can actually they get the freedom to create new jobs and business, this will make people believe here, okay, it's more simple. It's more simple and straightforward if we push back against the Russians. Because if we give in to the Russians, life will become hilariously complicated, complete nightmare, and people just hate this, hate complexity. The West can play certain games too. We can tell people, okay, you go to work, you pay your taxes, you don't do anything stupid in your personal life, in your activism, don't do anything crazy, and as long as you do that and toe the line, you can have a job, you can have a life, and safety from those Russians and Chinese and North Koreans who might actually come here. So I think that's a pretty big gamble. So the Russians are probably calculating, okay, we're gonna get this big pushback, but a certain number of people in those other European countries, a certain number of people are going to feel emboldened by what we just did. Your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry. It seems to me that, of course, something is happening. Clausewitz said that a military demonstration, of course, is expensive, and you can do these things for deception, but he called it dangerous. The Russians have been known to do dangerous maneuvers, and it's possible they're turning up the crank. They're applying pressure to Europe, but I don't think Europe has really responded to any of these military pressures. All the threats of "don't cross our line," "don't help the Ukrainians," or "we're going to nuke you." What have we? It's 27 times, 27 Russian lines that the countries of the West have crossed in helping Ukraine during this war, which has now gone on more than 3.5 years. I just don't think the Russians, know that just sitting there making threats and jumping up and down is going to do anything. It's gotten to be that the big bad wolf, all huff and puff and blow your house down. Will blow our house down already. Come on, come and do it. You can't even take Ukraine. There's one concern I have is about the echelon approach of the Russians. Their traditional thing is to put their crappy troops up front, their National Guardsmen, the least trained people, the dregs of society. This is what they seem to have said. When you look at the sent into Ukraine to begin with, except for a few units, they did send elite paratrooper units in, which got hurt when they tried to grab the airport there. It almost seems like the Ukraine invasion was not conducted by the best of the Russian military. It was conducted by a first strategic echelon, and that the second strategic echelon is now being mobilized. Of course, the third one, you got full mobilization. That's full-on nuclear war. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, the Ukraine invasion failure, I think they expected to win, but they're playing it for the long game. I mean, how do you see this being in Europe now?
Well, I mean, I think eventually the Russians will advertise their long-term commitment, right? I mean, if you see, or if they show on their television stations or the propaganda for the West, if they show how they raise a new generation of soldiers and workers for military goods, and how committed they are long-term, multi-generations. I think this is going to create a certain intimidation, because Western citizens are not prepared to do the same, and the only way to really counter that psychologically is to harken back to, let's say, the British mindset in World War II, or the American mindset in World War II. At home, the home front, just to have sort of a promise that we can make everything work. We can have the war production, we can have enough troops and enough specialists, and but also you have a private life. You have a life. And it's not going to, we don't have to do the same thing that the Russians are doing or the Chinese are doing. It's not full-on cult. It's not, you're not going to be a full-on peasant serf. And, I think that Westerners, they can finally band together, because I think for a long time they haven't been able to do that because of these ideological distinctions, and, everybody's being played off against each other, men against women, old against young, left, right, middle, Christian, Muslim, blah, blah, blah. Everybody in the West was played off. And if there's an outside threat, obviously that can be used to bring people together and create the sense of we're working together for a common goal, a larger goal, and everybody is part of that, is going to be part of that effort. I've seen some studies on this. Somebody actually gave me a stack of scientific books paid for by the German government. This is about extreme situations, emergency preparedness. How is the government going to react in a massive crisis? like warfare. And the experts, they've said that there's a certain excitement that happens when these dramatic events happen. It's sort of an inbuilt human instinct or like a mechanism that a larger number of people, they actually get a sense of adventure. It may sound strange, but this is actually what the experts have said, that it's not everybody's going to be depressed. Not everybody is just going to be consumed by fear. A lot of people will get, well, especially the men, will get a sense of adventure, a sense of purpose. And the Russians have miscalculated before. I mean, we saw the reports coming out after the failed Ukraine blitzkrieg. When some of the information got out about the predictions of the FSB or the SVR, when they said that nobody really in Ukraine is going to fight us and nobody in Europe has any inclination to push back against us. They're all our assets and friends, and nobody really wants to pick a fight with us. And these calculations were wrong. They told the superiors what the superiors wanted to hear.
Yeah, they were a big miscalculation, and this is the thing: when the tanks of the combined, what do they call it? Combined arms armies that were approaching Ukraine from the east, they weren't combining the arms, and Ukrainian civilians who were mobilized into militia units carrying anti-tank munitions, the little handheld things, they were knocking out Russian tanks and stopped the advance outside of Kiev. It's the ability of people to stand up, even people that don't have the best army in the world, their willingness to fight. There were areas that the local secret police in Ukraine were controlled by Moscow, and they'd surrendered, in the south. This is how the Russians got across the Dnieper in the south and got into Nikolaev, or almost took it, but didn't. The Ukrainians scuttled the last of their navy there, but they were pushed back out of that whole area in the subsequent time, which is unthinkable that Russia, such a large country with such a large army, could suffer so many defeats. The defeat in the battles around Kiev, the defeat then in September of 22 when they lost, I don't remember, some large number of rail cars filled with ammunition, a lot of it from China, when the Ukrainians pushed into their flank, the Russian right flank. And then, of course, the Russians got smart and just started fortifying and laying minefields everywhere so they couldn't be attacked. So it turned into a World War I kind of battle. They tried to use artillery on the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians used HIMARS rockets and other things to attack the Russian ammunition depots. So the Russians couldn't supply the artillery adequately for these gigantic barrages. The Russians haven't been able to use their Air Force in the war because of Ukrainian air defenses. And their Navy, the Black Sea Fleet, has been decimated. Lost a submarine, lost the flagship of the fleet. The Moskva was sunk by a Ukrainian, it's a former Soviet type of missile, a Neptune missile, modified and improved, and that ship caught fire and sank. So it's like the Russians have suffered some major defeats, which you can't imagine that they would purposely sacrifice the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, in addition to all the other boats and missile boats and whatnot and submarines that they've lost. So this war has been a real shock, I think, to the Russians. But Russia has depth. It's huge. It has massive resources. And in terms of human resources, I mean, look, what is the population of Germany? 80 million? Population of Russia is 140 million people, right? And they have higher rates of mobilization. How many men could Germany mobilize if Europe is attacked right now? How many could they put into uniform? Do you know the number?
No, the number is secret. I think they claim to not know any specific data because years ago when they scrapped the regular compulsory conscription. When you had to, almost any young man had to get tested. Are you able for for military training? Then you had to go undergo basic training. Then you had to spend another few months in the armed services, and then you would leave. And you could be reactivated and have, remember your basic training.
Are the German armed forces voluntary now? Is it all volunteer?
Well, it's like, it used to for the longest time. They had like half a million active personnel, and they had this rotation of all these young people coming in, getting training, then getting out, new young guys coming in, getting training, getting out. So you had like this millions and millions of people who knew how the armed forces functioned, who knew how to operate firearm and follow these orders and be a baseline soldier at least. But then the system was stopped. And the government, especially the leftist part of the government, the social democrats who used to love Moscow all the way for such a long time, the government then scrapped this compulsory service training, and then the government said, "Well, we stopped pooling the data. We don't even know where these young men live that have been born since then."
Right. So you can't call them up.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't
have they not registered anyone yet with all the emergency going on? They haven't registered. There isn't a call to.
There's programs. Yeah. There's programs.
So they're making them register now. Are they? Is it mandatory?
Well, I think they can access databases in a different way. They don't do it like they used to do it formally, but they can buy all sorts of. If they have to, they can buy all sorts of data on the free market, because every young guy, every young adult male is feeding his data into the internet. My name, my profile, where I live, what games I play shooting games, blah blah blah. I live in that area and I go to school.
Now Germany is the most populous country in Western Europe. It's got the biggest population, the biggest economy. Their army, the Bundeswehr, right now has 182,496 active duty personnel as of April 2025, with a goal to expand to 203,000 by 2031.
Sure.
Right?
I mean,
that
the whole thing
sound too good, doesn't it?
There was strong indications that there was some sort of a secret deal. After 1991, hatched out between the U.S. government and the Russian government concerning the fate of Germany. This has been sort of very strongly hinted at by former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and some people who worked in government. Even before that, the conservative governments, they all said kind of the same thing. This was a high-level negotiation between the Americans and the Russians, and they can't say what was part of that negotiation, but it sounded like, or they had the impression that the Russians would get their tanks out of Germany. The Russians would physically withdraw from Germany, but under the condition that a reunited Germany would basically ruin its own army or scale it down completely and just limit it to a very large degree. And I think this agreement could never be made public. This was probably never really made public, but there's always ways around this. There's always ways around sort of limitations that were put in place. You can sell weapons or move weapons out of the country and store it somewhere close and then fly them back in. You can have secret databases of young men that are able to do military service, or you can just task the Americans. You find the data on the Germans and then give the data to the German government, so the German government can say we didn't gather this data. there's stockpiles, secret stockpiles of the old assault rifles, the old HK G3 assault rifle. They still have a secret number of those around. I think it's in the millions. They got ammo for that, and there's all kinds of hidden stuff you can pull. And there's always kind of this idea that you can mobilize a specific number of people on short notice, give them basic training, because the old training was very inefficient. I mean, I was kind of on the tail end of this whole old system. And everybody who went through the system, they told me it was very inefficient. You would get basic training for like few weeks, and then it was just boredom. You would guard something that wasn't important. You were standing around, drink lots of beer, and just, pass the time until your service was over. So if you streamline that, and at this point, we don't even have the facilities anymore to do it the old-fashioned way. But you don't need these facilities. I mean, you can have a flexible system, and you can make something happen. And I think that,
well, Ukraine's military is almost 1 million men now. 980,000 that the Ukrainians have under arms. Zelensky's pointed out that this is way more than 4 times the French military, but the Polish military is bigger than the French military, and they only have 216,000. You have 186,000 in Germany. These European countries, and Poland's military, by the way, is the 3rd largest in NATO behind the U.S. and Turkey. U.S. and Turkey are the largest militaries in NATO. And of course, Turkey's not, I don't think, is a reliable NATO ally. And Turkey's not really in Europe. Turkey's in Asia. Turkey's not going to be able to defend Germany. It's up to Poland. So this is the thing with Ukraine having almost 1 million men under arms. That's more than France, Poland, and Germany put together, and the Scandinavian countries, much more than that. And so imagine if the Russians force Ukraine to surrender, and this is the Russian plan, by the way. Their plan is all the service personnel, all that 980,000, if Ukraine were to surrender, they would be forced, because the death penalty hangs over them because they've revolted against Moscow. This is the way Moscow views it. They could work off their death penalty by remaining under arms. So then the Soviet Union, the new Soviet Union, Russia would form. The Ukrainians you'd have 1 million Ukrainians maybe. You'd have a couple million Russians and Belarusians. You had this giant army, and Europe couldn't possibly stop it with these tiny military establishments you have in Germany. And Poland is not that much bigger. It's bigger than Germany's, but it's not that much bigger in France. And they're all not forward deployed into Russia. They're all back deployed in their own country. So Russia can come and gobble them up one at a time if Russians move fast enough. So this is the thing that's so amazing about the Russians putting pressure on the Baltic states. Everybody thinks, well, how can Russia do that? They're not defeating Ukraine. But there's more soldiers and veteran soldiers who know how to fight a modern war, especially with drones, in Ukraine than there is in Europe. Europe is actually a softer, more presentable target to the Russians right now. And of course, look at the way Trump views Europe. Will Trump help Europe? Did you hear what he said last week? He said again, the Ukrainians, they had no business, making war on Russia. This is stupid. It's like, wait a minute, they got invaded by Russia? And tiny Ukraine, they have no business. They're outnumbered 15 to 1.
As big as France.
No, they're not outnumbered 15 to 1. They've got almost 1 million men under arms.
Yeah, it's a large country too. Yeah, I mean, I stopped really listening to the words of Trump because it's like I don't think it's supposed to make any sense to anybody. I would not take him literal.
Scream of consciousness. It's like
reality
TV nonsense.
It's like I'm always translating, from Trump's speech into what is he actually saying, or what was on his mind, or what's the purpose of this statement? Is it just about to say something and present himself as powerful and smart? I don't really listen to his words per se. What he's
dumb
saying.
And clueless. This man is dumb and clueless. I'm sick and tired of hearing his ignorance come out of his mouth. I'm really sick of it. I voted for him. I'll confess, because I didn't want to vote for the communist, Kamala Harris.
Sure.
Because that's what I think she is. She's a Chinese connected, leftist, just like her running mate.
Yeah, I mean
Tim, what's his name?
Yeah, I mean the funny thing is, in a sick way, I mean during the Cold War, obviously the Soviet Union and China to a degree, they were cultivating the international left, so they had that. Not completely, they were also fighting leftists who weren't so loyal to Moscow, but they had the left, and so after the formal end of the Soviet Union, they decided we're going to get the right wing as well. We're going to keep the left as much as we can. We're not going to keep all of them because, Russia has to shape and adapt. You can't
control everybody, right?
Yeah, I mean, they probably knew that they were going to lose part of the international left with what they were about to do, reinstating the Orthodox Church run by the KGB, personality cult, Putin, fascist-like oligarchs. So they were about to, they knew they were going to lose part of the international left, but they wanted to get into the international right wing. And ironically, this meant that the communists were trying to get deeper and deeper into the anti-communist movement. And that wasn't exactly a new thing, just the scale was new. Because from the very first moment, I think the Soviets tried to infiltrate the anti-communist movement internationally, and I just noticed these similarities between the early attempts at controlling the anti-communist movement and what we see today with these characters like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, what they call the PayPal mafia, because all these business guys, they're really successful now. They all started with the PayPal corporation, and they get all these government contracts with their software products. Security-related software products such as Palantir or what the other company they have, Endural, and you've spoken about this mentality that this group has, Thiel and others, this some call it the Dark Enlightenment, and they all like this Curtis Yarvin blogger apparently, who's so generic, who's incredibly generic about what he says, and
Well, I don't know if it's generic. It's an interesting, if you look at the Dark Enlightenment, this is the Dark Enlightenment book by Nick Land, right? It's he's a scholar. He's a very sophisticated person. He lives in Shanghai, China, by the way, now is what I've heard. It's very clever. It's ideological. It's an alienated right-winger who hates the West so much because of the way the West has become, hates liberalism, hates conservatism.
It's too, he's missing the power. He wants people with power and control.
And it's sort of like there's a point to fascism. There's ad Hitlerum is not a good argument. Hitler wasn't, we want to be able to recover some of Hitler's ideas without
that's what he's saying. Exactly. Yeah. So we have to get over we have to get over our dictator phobia and all that. So basically he is this Yarvin guy, and basically this whole mindset, it's a blend of,
and he calls Yarvin our hero in this book, by the way.
Yeah, it's kind of a blend. It's kind of a blend of monarchy, fascism,
ultra capitalism with billionaire kings,
ultra libertarianism, It's all that, this,
and the old ultra Catholicism, like let's get rid of all the Protestants kind of thing.
And so by extension, what this group, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and the other guys, I'm going to mention a few of them. So what this group essentially is saying is that they are defining anti-communism, because what they're fighting is, the socialism, the grand conspiracy, the things that destroy societies and destroys people, and this destruction overall, and they're fighting that. The bad stuff, that's, they can label it communism or modernity or democracy have failed or whatever. But essentially, they're saying we're the best anti-communists in the world, and we live that because we have these businesses and we actually work with the government, but that's okay. And they live that. They want to be every leftist's nightmare. They have the money. They're elitist. They work together. They work with the government, and they want to rule and have this control and take that control away from the voters, i.e. democracy. Okay? So, and when I looked deeper into this Thiel group, Peter Thiel and this Dark Enlightenment, I thought, man, this is exactly what happened in the immediate phase after the communist revolution in Russia. Because what happened back then was these washed up leftover Romanovs, they fled to places in Europe, some of them and their relatives, they went to the United States, and they wanted to build this international anti-communist movement, and they wanted to define it. Problem was, the whole thing was infiltrated by the KGB, which wasn't named KGB at the time, but so be it. The whole these emigré circles, they were all infiltrated by Soviet intelligence, and these washed up Romanovs, they had another big problem, because they were from the House of Hessen and the House of Schleswig-Holstein, and this particular brand of aristocracy, there must have been some really high-level Soviet collaborators in that aristocracy, some really high-level traitors, and so that's another problem mixed into it. So, in short, you could not trust these Romanov guys in exile. They were not to be trusted, even though they looked so legit to the right wing internationally. They were pushed out of the seats of power by communists, and they had this old style regime running for so long, and now they're gone, and so they try to connect with anybody who was right wing or ultra right wing. With the German Nazis, they try to connect with Brits, they try to connect with Americans, and especially they try to instill this mentality into these American business people, like the Peter Thiels of that particular era back then. To say that democracy doesn't work, democracy is like the slow pace road to communism, and we have to get more fascist or semi-fascist or monarchist. And Americans, they need to we can tell the Americans how to do an aristocracy properly. I mean, there is an argument for a healthy hierarchy. People who deserve a specific level of responsibility, people who can do things better, people who are more trustworthy than others. But to have these weirdo Russians, who are not even Russians, they were from the House of Hessen, the German aristocracy, to have these weirdos come over and say, we're going to teach you Americans how to be more aristocratic. We're going to teach you Americans how to do it right. And by the way, we're working with the Nazis over in Europe and some French crazies. This was a huge problem by itself. Then the whole thing was infiltrated by Soviet intelligence, and they wanted to define what anti-communism is, and they put in so much traditional conspiracy mythology. We know that the fake protocols of Zion came out of Russia, but the Romanovs then made it a big thing, a much bigger thing. And I think the role of them, these leftover Romanovs, I think their role has been understated to a large degree, because they still had money, they still had contacts, and they could pay for activists. They could pay groups, and they could tell them what the trends are, and push these fake protocols of Zion, and say that true true anti-communism has to be this, that, and the other. And if you deviate from that,
You
you're
mean
not a real
they are pushing the
anti-communist.
protocols of the Elders of Zion? They're pushing that?
Oh
These
yeah,
Romanovs?
this was a big deal. Yeah, this was a very, very big deal.
Oh my gosh.
So basically, this started from the very first moment. This started essentially with the Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich of Russia, who was a first cousin of the last Tsar. Sounds very Russian, the guy, but you know, he's from these European aristocratic families, and so Kirill then proclaimed himself emperor in exile in 1926. So he vowed to return to Russia one day, or his children or children's children would return to Russia one day and reclaim the throne. Meanwhile, they were going to have this emperor throne, Russian emperor throne in exile. Okay? So, but after claiming this exile throne, Kirill became known as the Soviet Tsar because in the event of a restoration of the monarchy, he intended to keep some of the features of the Soviet regime. Kirill found his strongest support among a group known as the Mladorossi, which ultimately became heavily influenced by fascism. The organization called itself super right-wing, but eventually began to exhibit pro-Soviet sympathies, arguing that the monarchy and the Soviet Bolshevik system could peacefully coexist. So you have the throne, and below that would be a socialist type system. So it would perfectly work together, they said. The Mladorossi believed that the Soviet government, for all its negative ideology, was preserving the Russian state and defending its national interests. They also believed that the October Revolution was merely the beginning of an evolutionary process that would create a new young Russia. Mladorossi used the slogan Tsar and the Soviets. And so Kirill then had to distance himself from the organization when its founder, Alexander Kazembek, was spotted meeting with Soviet diplomats, which probably means Soviet spies. Kirill Romanov, you know, the emperor, the Kirill Romanov, the emperor in exile, was close to members of the Nazi party when he was in Germany. He is said to have paid Erich Ludendorff a sum of nearly 500,000 gold marks in 1922 or 1923. And so they the whole family, these washed up Romanovs, they styled themselves as the best anti-communists. Kirill's son was Grand Duke Vladimir Kirillovich. During World War II, Vladimir was living in Saint-Briac-sur-Mer in Brittany. And in 1941, he issued the following statement. In this grave hour, when Germany and almost all the nations of Europe have declared a crusade against communism and Bolshevism, which has enslaved and oppressed the people of Russia for 24 years, I turn to all the faithful and loyal sons of our homeland with this appeal. Do what you can to the best of your ability to bring down the Bolshevik regime and to liberate our homeland from the terrible yoke of communism. So, problem was, the Romanovs, they did it wrong. You know, they tried to encourage people, rebel against the Soviets, while for a while they were actually saying we could coexist with the Soviets. You know, we actually could work with the Soviets. You know, the Romanovs, they were making all the big mistakes. And they paid all these activist groups, and they tried to be with these American business people, influence them. So, the Romanovs added another whole layer to the conspiracy mythology, which elevated the laughable forgeries like the Protocols of Zion to the highest possible status. So the protocols were so fake, and they were even exposed very early on as a fake, but through people like the Romanovs and the organizations they paid and their powerful friends in the West, even in Britain and the US, that's why the Protocols of Zion became a big hit. And this is how people began to see that conspiracy mythology, as they began to see it as the core of anti-communism, right? And so the big baffling joke was that the Romanovs, being from the House of Hessen, the House of Schleswig-Holstein, the Romanovs could have simply just asked their relatives in Europe, especially on German soil or after the war or in British soil, they could have just asked them, hey, by the way, is this conspiracy mythology true? Did these little Jewish families take over the British Empire? And their relatives could have told them, absolutely not. It's just the whole Rothschild fairy tales are garbage. They didn't steal from the Landgraf of Hessen. They didn't scam the stock market in London. That's just fake. So, but still, the Romanovs pushed this mythology so hard, incredibly hard.
Something that the Black Hundreds came about under Nicholas II, and this is though Nicholas II investigated the protocols and discovered that they were a fraud, so he kind of backed away. But still, these Black Hundreds formed, and they were all for the Tsar, and they were all for this, fighting this Jewish conspiracy, supposedly. And of course, it's all nonsense. And it spread to the West at the end of World War I. And this is where the infection, Henry Ford picked it up and started translating it into English, ended up getting sued over accusing the leading Jewish person in America at the time was Jacob Schiff, a Jewish banker, Lower East Side banker. Guy accused him of financing the Bolshevik Revolution when in fact he'd financed the whites. These kind of anti-Jewish propaganda nonsense has fueled, it's fueled Hitler, and the Russians are using it to this day. The communists are using it aligned with the Muslims, spreading it through Turkey and other Muslim countries in the Middle East, using it as a weapon. And they've weaponized it in trying to make the right to destroy conservatism and anti-communism and make it into anti-Jewish, make it into Nazism. So they could say, you guys are Nazis, we're going to smash you and get divide the right and destroy the right.
I always tell that to people on social media or comment on my videos, if because there's a bunch of people out there. They read the stuff on the internet, they totally believe it, they copy it, and so they go around and they just rehash, copy and paste these old claims about the elders of Zion, basically. And when you disagree, they will say that you work for the Jews or you are Jewish and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And it's like, or every
you're
time,
a race traitor or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
And every time they think they convince themselves and they convince these onlookers that by having this stupid debate style that they're actually fighting the conspiracy, right? And and to this very day, people, they confuse these things. They don't understand what anti-communism really is. They think it's that conspiracy activism. It's conspiracy mythology.
That's what they think it is. Yeah.
But the KGB popularized this stuff so hard in the Muslim world that basically more than 1 billion Muslims believe it. So every right winger or ultra right winger, everybody who styles himself, an anti-communist. These people, they think they're special. They have special knowledge. No, they don't. They believe the same as more than 1 billion Muslims. Even a Muslim goat herder believes this. Yeah. It's nothing special. It's a mass product aimed at the masses.
Yeah, but it's strategy. And see, this is where strategy is like a language. It's a language of its own. And if you don't understand the language, you think you're hearing truth, but it's really a strategy to leverage you, to turn you into something that they can then deal with more easily or control or destroy you then with what you yourself have believed, that they have created for you to believe. And it's such a sophisticated strategy, and people don't see it.
Yeah,
they
and
don't
by the way,
understand.
I mean, we remember the words of Medvedev after after this airstrike against the Iranian nuclear program. When Medvedev said that, we'll give the Iranians nukes, we'll give them the components or fully assembled nukes, and nobody can do anything against that. So basically, hardcore Muslims, these hardcore Muslims, they believe that they can attack. These Muslims believe that they can attack any sort of major city in Europe, for example, or the United States, can attack these cities with a nuclear weapon, and thereby they think they're fighting the Zionist world conspiracy, because every government out there here in Europe is Zionist occupied, as they believe. So this is another problem that's been created through the KGB and these willing listeners. And there's been so many of these Russians involved in and infiltrated emigré circles, involved in spreading this mythology and trying to define what anti-communism is. We got this character, Chereb Spiridovich. Chereb Spiridovich, conspiracy author, was funded by Henry Ford. The American car mogul Henry Ford, who also popularized the protocols of Zion in America.
Yes,
and of course we get these some of the parallels to today's American, or some of America's moguls today who work with the Russians, and they say these ultra right wing statements. Not as brazen as back then, but pretty close. This Russian guy, this Chereb Spiridovich, this Russian count, he revitalized an old fairy tale about 300 Jewish families running the big conspiracy, which then influenced the book called The Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300 by John Coleman. And we saw few people actually know this, we saw a continuous relationship between American intelligence and the Romanovs in exile, with people like Colonel Harris Houghton, Colonel John Jacob Astor, Major General Ralph Van Damen, Colonel Williams Sawyer Bryant, Colonel Nicholas Biddle, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, and others. And Henry Ford created his own personal intelligence service and hired a substantial number of Russians, exiled Russians, so-called white Russians.
White Russians, yeah. The white Russian diaspora, which was, of course, infiltrated by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, and Boris, this character, Boris Brazol, he had a copy of Nilus's edition of the Protocols of Zion, which was then passed to Harris Houghton from by a group of military intelligence people. Houghton paid for the translation of the protocols, and Henry Ford then turned them into a mass phenomenon. The stated goal. He
published them in the Dearborn Observer in Michigan.
Yeah, so we have these Russians all around, these supposed anti-communist Russians all around us, same as today. Lots of Russians involved, lots of Russian contacts, and they contact these American industrialists, and they want to build this whole movement, but it's completely infiltrated. The stated goal back then was to create an anti-communist international based on conspiracy lore. And
notice how Hitler emerged initially as an ally of the Bolsheviks. When the Munich beer hall push happened, there was supposed to be a communist revolt in Berlin simultaneously, which is something that Viktor Suvorov has pointed out.
Yeah, and Chereb Spiridovich, the conspiracy author, probably collaborated with the so-called ace of spies, Sidney Riley. Grand Duke Alexander Romanov met Riley as early as the year 1900. Riley was
And
tasked.
Riley was Jewish. Riley was a Jewish Ukrainian, by the way, of Jewish Ukrainian.
Riley,
But he was a
but
British
he had
agent
multiple.
who
He was very cagey about his real identity, so he was telling everybody something
That's
different.
why he was such a good spy in Russia. He was part of the Lockhart plot. The British intelligence tried to make him dictator of Russia.
Yeah. So
They
Riley
bribed the Latvian rifles to kill all the Bolsheviks,
Yeah.
but
so Riley,
unfortunately, Fanny Lloyd shot Lenin in the neck, and the Red Terror started, and the Latvian rifles never got anywhere near the Bolshevik Congress.
So Riley was tasked at the time with buying war supplies from America for Russia in World War One. And so, of course, then we got this whole mess with the Russian Civil War, Operation Trust. All these white groups got infiltrated, but at the same time, Americans, especially Americans and Brits, they were willing to continue to work with these white groups and these exiled white figures, Russian figures, which was a huge mistake. And this was a huge mistake. And then Herman Bernstein sued Henry Ford over the fake protocols of Zion and published the book History of a Lie in 1921, fairly early on. The so-called white Russian emigré Vladimir Orlov, who ran his own intelligence group, supplied Ford with materials for the lawsuit against Bernstein. Orlov also forged documents against 2 U.S. senators. Also, Boris Brazol was also contracted to help Mr. Ford. So these Romanov guys especially, they could claim they've been there, done that, seen it all. They've been in the middle of this, world Jewish conspiracy thing, and so that gave the Romanovs, so these leftover Romanovs, this credibility. But yeah, that was a complete nightmare. And of course, the somewhat Jewish background of some of the more infamous Soviet revolutionaries. I mean, we've talked about this before. There were a bunch of so-called Jews in Russia who didn't really follow the Jewish faith anymore. They were just more like living on the outskirts of a thin middle class in Russia, and they got swept up in all of this in this movement. But just to this hyper focus on that Jewish attribute, okay? So that some guy, he had like the Jewish father or grandfather or family was Jewish, and so this became the fanatical focus, the hyper focus, and together with these forgeries like the protocols and Henry Ford and the Romanovs and these other Russian characters, that made the movement, that made the conspiracy movement, and that made this this fallacy that traditional conspiracy fairy tales are anti-communism. And here, for example, so Lenin. Let's take this guy for example. Lenin. So Lenin was called a Jew like other leading revolutionaries. Actually, he had a grandfather named Cyril Moisevich Blank in Odessa, who lived in the early 1800s.
One Jewish grandfather.
He converted to the Orthodox Church and changed his name. Otherwise, Lenin was descended from Russians and Kalmyks. He was basically a Russian.
And his parents were pious Christians, Orthodox Christians. Lenin's parents were.
He was a Russian who joined the Communist Revolution, full stop. Trotsky's father was not a religious man. His mother was somewhat. He was simply a middle-class Russian who joined the Communists. And the Bolshevik conundrum was how to transform rowdy peasants into proletarians and capable revolutionaries.
And there's even the claim, they make the claim that Stalin was Jewish because his real name is Jugashvili. See, it's a Jewish name,
It's
but it's not.
Georgian.
It's a Georgian name. And it's just, and he was trained in a seminary. He was
Yeah,
being trained as
I
an
mean,
Orthodox priest.
yeah, and also, I mean, people have to remember ethnically, Semites, that's a huge group. I mean, the whole, going back thousands and thousands of years in the whole Mesopotamia area and various empires that came afterwards,
The
the
Babylonians and the Assyrians were
Yeah,
also
so-
Semites. And the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians were Semites.
So basically, Jews were like this small fraction, very tiny fraction from that super large Semitic group, and it's difficult. It's difficult to have coherence when you're forced to escape in all kinds of directions. It's very complicated to have this super duper conspiracy going on, right? Especially if you don't have a state, if you don't have state power, you can't create false legends, you can't create false histories, you can't create false documents, you don't have an army, you don't have a place to escape to, you don't have a place to train your agents. If you're scattered around the world, I mean, you can't build such a conspiracy that has been alleged by so many people, and so yeah, some Semitic people ended up in the Russian sphere, the Soviet sphere. But if you look at a bunch of people today, I mean, there's people that are called Jewish, or they view themselves as Jewish, but they look Slavic. It's just a mess, and it's like the world is really complicated, and it takes time to understand history and understand the intelligence operations that went on. But people hate complexity. Again, just like I said at the beginning of the show, people hate this complexity. They totally despise it, so they want this easy thing, this very, very simple thing. And, what we see today with these, this new right wing, these new right wing oligarchs, some people in the Trump administration, that's kind of the same ploy that was tried before. The same ploy from the Russians using these assets and trying to define what anti-communism is and what the big conspiracy is supposed to be like. And then, of course, in Germany, these white Russian emigrés or former Russian monarchists, these Russian guys, they collaborated with the Nazis through an organization named Aufbau. Walter Nicolai, former leader of German military intelligence, worked with Grand Duke Cyril Vladimirovich Romanov. Of course, members of the houses of Hessen, Hanover, Schleswig-Holstein eventually joined the Nazi party, so the same families that the Romanovs were from. General Ludendorff established an intelligence service for Kirill Romanov. Walter Nicolai had worked for Ludendorff as the head of the German Army High Command Intelligence Service during World War I. Total mess. And of course, these people trusted each other because they had some, aristocratic backgrounds. Ludendorff had supposedly some aristocratic family background. Russian monarchists funneled large sums of money to the Nazi party, the NSDAP. Same reason nowadays. German right-wing extremists will happily take Russian money because they think that's what the NSDAP did, the Nazi party did in the past, so it's good enough for us now. That's what they believe. So these Russians funneled money to the Nazi party, and Boris Brasol, again, same guy, Boris Brasol, other members of the Aufbau, especially Kirill's wife, Grand Duchess Victoria, connected the German extreme right wing to the Americans, like Henry Ford, who was a Hitler supporter, or at least pretended to be. In 1938, Brasol, who now had an American citizenship, secretly helped organize an anti-Comintern Congress, anti-communist Congress in Germany with the support of the Gestapo. The assembly included speakers, guests from Canada, France, England, and Switzerland. Heinrich Himmler showed interest in Brasol in August 1938 and even asked Heinrich Müller to compile a report on the previous activities of the so-called white emigration, these Russian guys. Hoo boy. Yeah, and it gets much worse and worse and worse and worse. So, and so today we hear stuff like this. The American conspiracy influencer Alex Jones claimed in 2024 that the Rothschilds had so much control over Britain that they could destroy the Tsarist rule in Russia and replace it with Jewish communism. As a Judas-style payback to the Rothschilds, Lenin supposedly gave Ukraine away, which was really Russian territory. After more than 80 years, Putin managed to liberate his people. But the United States is still kind of occupied by the Rothschild conspiracy. American patriots need Putin's help for liberation. And this is basically what Jones was alluding to. And this is kind of, and then of course Jones was in contact with retired U.S. General Michael Flynn, who had his scandals. So it's like the same ideas that were pushed by exiled Romanovs, these white Russian emigre circles, the same stuff that they pushed back then, 100 years ago. It's the same stuff we hear today. It's the same stuff that we hear today. And so now we're at the present time. And we have these oligarchs like Peter Thiel, who's actually German. Peter Thiel with companies like Palantir, and he was with PayPal, and this is kind of a group that used to include Elon Musk and a bunch of others. Sometimes it's referred to as the PayPal mafia because they've become so powerful. They work together and they grow and grow and grow their business, and they grow their circle. They have influence over the Trump administration, the current administration, and they seem to have this ideology that is warmed over Alexander Dugin, warmed over Julius Evola, sometimes referred to as the Dark Enlightenment, stuff from the blogger Curtis Yarvin. And so this mentality that Peter Thiel and others are influenced by, this mentality is, America should be maybe a dictatorship or half dictatorship or a monarchy. There's this big conspiracy going on. Democracy has failed. We need to get tough. We just have to change America fundamentally. But then, some of these characters are in contact with the Russians, or they push certain ideas, or they mention certain ideas that are just amateurish. They're just wrong. I mean, you can argue all day about, how people are oftentimes too stupid to make decisions. And historically, when people had the option, after hundreds and hundreds of years of serfdom, finally people had the option of trying something, joining something new. What did they join? Soviet communism or fascism or Nazi National Socialism. So you can argue that all day, but it's not good enough to say these things. It's not good enough to say, we need to get tough. Maybe we need to, be more in control of things and find out the traitors and those who destabilize our country. These things are nice to say, but then you actually have to do them right. You have to do them professionally. You have to do that correctly. You have to. You need to have that level of skill and expertise and personal qualities. And so Peter Thiel actually appeared on the radar of the FBI because Peter Thiel was visiting exquisite birthday parties, at castles near Vienna, Austria. Very aristocratic style, right? Castles, this whole European gimmick, parties, and then, these weird guests, and they introduced Peter Thiel to a Russian guy, and that's what alerted, or this and other things alerted the FBI. So, Peter Thiel, actually German, we would pronounce him Peter Thiel. He's a member of the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. He's a citizen of Germany, the United States, and New Zealand. And as of recently, he was reportedly in the process of acquiring yet another passport from Malta. Okay. So he wants to present himself as this diehard Anglo, as this like very, very respectable, powerful Anglo character. So he married his longtime partner, Matt Danzeisen, in Vienna, Austria. Again, they marry in Austria. Why? On Thiel's 50th birthday. Danzeisen started his career as an investment banker at Bank of America Securities, and later, when the couple were dating, Mr. Danzeisen was vice president of BlackRock. So, we're so Anglo, just trust us. But the problem is, these Anglo circles are, they've been, for 100 years, they've been influenced by these Russian circles, especially Russians, influenced or infiltrated by these Russian circles, these Russians pretending to be anti-communist. So Business Insider then reported that Thiel allegedly became an FBI informant in 2021, or had some sort of a relationship with the FBI. Neither Thiel nor...
Is this considered credible?
Yes. Neither Thiel nor the FBI even commented to Business Insider about the report. It says Thiel's reporting to the FBI was largely limited to foreign contacts and attempts by foreign governments to penetrate Silicon Valley. And there were other mainstream media outlets who got into this topic as well, and they sort of confirmed this relationship. So in the summer of 2021, the Insider claims Thiel began providing information as a confidential human source to Jonathan Boomer, a Los Angeles-based FBI agent specialized in investigating political corruption and foreign influence campaigns. Now, this Jonathan Boomer character from the FBI later becomes important with Elon Musk. So, obviously, Thiel's business interests rely on the FBI and other government agencies as potential revenue sources. He retains a 10% stake in Palantir, a data company that has sold more than $1 billion of software and related services to the federal government, including the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI. A $250 million contract with the U.S. Army in September adds to the evidence that Palantir is essentially a government service provider. So what caused this relationship, let's call it a relationship, to happen between the FBI and Mr. Thiel? So there was, a few years ago, there was an extravagant birthday party, a birthday party with hundreds of guests held at Castle Neuwaldeck, a 17th century palace in the suburbs of Vienna, Austria. And Austria is completely infiltrated by the Russians, by the way. Austria is so lost at this point. So the whole gimmick: statues of Greek gods, a troupe of acrobats, champagne, lots of guests. And a guest of honor was Christian Angermayer, a German entrepreneur who had forged relationships with politicians across the world. The party, this was in 2018, commemorated his 40th birthday. So, again, a German guy, Christian Angermayer, celebrates his birthday in Austria, and one of the guests was Peter Thiel, who is actually Peter Thiel, a guy who was, I think, was even born in Germany. His German parents.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So
he's gay. He's gay, by the way.
yeah. So it's all a bit. I mean, sure. I mean, Germans, they look like. I mean, most Germans they look like Americans. So but it's still it's all a bit strange. Mr. Thiel was already friendly with Mr. Angermeyer. Over the next few years, he would pour millions into Angermeyer-backed ventures as a co-investor. Another one of Mr. Angermeyer's guests was a diplomat named Daniel Bisslinger, who worked in Moscow at the Kremlin's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Bisslinger had previously been an attaché working at the Russian embassy in Berlin and sometimes served as Vladimir Putin's interpreter. So then, according to how this party was reconstructed later, or the events were reconstructed by these journalists, it was supposedly Mr. Angermeyer who introduced the Russian guy Bisslinger to Mr. Thiel at the party. And this is what Thiel would later tell the FBI. So, allegedly, after some small talk, Bisslinger made a pitch to Thiel. Thiel should travel to Russia to attend the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. If Thiel chose to attend, Bisslinger said, Bisslinger would arrange for him to meet privately with Putin. And Angermeyer's spokesperson said, we can't really recall the exact details of the conversation. We don't really remember. But the conversation at the palace in Vienna was memorable enough for Bisslinger to reach out again to Thiel more than 3 years later in January of 2022. So that's almost with the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Just a month before the invasion.
And so according to this Business Insider report, Mr. Thiel reported Bisslinger's two approaches to the FBI, along with the names of two others, a German and a Russian. All three men, Thiel told the FBI, had tried to work their way into his circle in order to push the Kremlin's interest. But, we don't really know how happy Thiel was to tell this to the FBI, because the press was there first. The Atlantic reported on this stuff, Business Insider, I think Der Spiegel in Germany reported on this. So
everybody saw this.
Yeah, everybody, it wasn't a secret anymore. It wasn't really a secret anymore. And so
he's kind of obligated to tell the FBI, so he wouldn't follow
and he
suspicion.
probably what Thiel told the FBI, the FBI was probably told as well by other sources. So it was just to confirm, if Thiel was saying the same things as the other sources, possibly. And so then, this was an investigation by Der Spiegel, legendary German publication, very close to the intelligence services here. An investigation by Der Spiegel, drawing on thousands of Bisslinger's emails, detailed how Bisslinger, that Russian attaché guy, how Bisslinger cultivated pro-Russia sentiment both in public and in private. Some of his greatest successes were members of the right-wing party AfD, the German right-wing party AfD. Der Spiegel called those politicians Putin's pawns. Right, so imagine the whole setting. You're in this vintage castle, and there's these Russians running around, and all these people, and then of course these guys, these guests at the party, they also meet with German far-right politicians, maybe even at fancy palaces. And this is how they cultivate people and say to them, we are the monarchists. We are at least halfway fascist. We like elites. We are the anti-communists, and we fight the Jewish world conspiracy. This is kind of the pitch that the Russians could always pull in general. This is how they could play it. And And also this Christian Angermayer character, he invested in all kinds of things, but also he invested in psychedelics, marketable products. And this is something that we saw an interest. Other people from this Thiel, Musk, Palantir, PayPal circle, they all have an expressed interest in psychedelics. I mean, they say for medicinal purposes, but there may be more to it.
Elon Musk takes some kind of micro doses of these things, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a legitimate medical argument for this, but when we talk about all this, extreme right-wing stuff or this Russian stuff, it does have like a different component as well. We talked about this, with this new right-wing, this Alexander Dugin infested scene. They found out that when you indoctrinate people with this ideology and then you give these people or you suggest to these people that they take psychedelics, this could then really bake in the message. The message really gets baked in. The left used to do this with LSD and super high doses of cannabis and other psychedelics. The left used to do this, but then other groups figured out that you can do this with anybody and any ideology. You can just, bake it in. Right? And who knows what these people do in their spare time? And then this Angermayer tried to be everywhere. Christian Angermayer, he had a private forum organized in 2020 on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, very important regular conference. Richard Grenell, the former U.S. Intel chief who was then serving under Trump as U.S. ambassador to Germany, spoke at Mr. Angermayer's private forum. And it gets worse.
Mr. Grenell is also gay.
Oh yeah, that's right. And the host of Angermayer's birthday party and owner of that fancy palace in Vienna was the Austrian investor Alexander Schütz, who joined the supervisory board of Deutsche Bank in 2017 when the Chinese company HNA, which had business ties with him, became a major shareholder in the bank. And they also had another guest, Mr. Markus Braun, then the CEO of the German company Wirecard, which completely exploded in 2020. Germany's biggest business fraud scandal in recent memory. And also, Jan Marsalek, former Wirecard board member, is now on Interpol's most wanted list and believed to be hiding in Russia. So it's believed that Jan Marsalek from Wirecard, that he's been a Russian spy for a bunch of years. And also, I think his grandfather has been suspected of being a Soviet spy in Austria. It's a complete nightmare. And then we got this. This is from The Guardian. This is the very famous British newspaper. The story has the headline, FBI whistleblower claims he tried to get to Elon Musk to warn him he was being targeted by Russia. So this FBI person that they talk about or write about, this was Jonathan Boomer, who was also involved in the Peter Thiel thing, who was, I think was used, I think, as a source in this story about Peter Thiel. So basically, Jonathan Boomer said, I worked with the FBI, I was freaking out because Elon Musk's circle was infiltrated. A July 2022 article reported that Jared Birchall, who served as Musk's wealth manager, had cornered his boss to discuss his concerns about a then new advisor to the Tesla CEO named Igor Kurganov, a Russian-born ex-professional gambler. Birchall reportedly saw Kurganov as a newcomer who suddenly had immense influence on what to do with Elon Musk's money. The journal described how Kurganov had spent time sleeping in Musk's home during the pandemic, and that Musk reportedly told Birchall he was considering leaving Kurganov in charge of his charitable giving. The journal said it was basing its reporting on more than a dozen people close to Musk, Birchall, and Kurganov. The newspaper also reported at the time that Birchall had learned that an FBI agent had been making preliminary inquiries into Kurganov as part of his job to watch for foreign interference in U.S. companies. So at the time of publishing these articles, Kurganov had not been accused of wrongdoing. He did not provide a comment to the newspaper at the time. And this FBI person, Boomer, said he did not have direct dealings with Musk. He said he tried to convey his concerns to another agent who was described as an FBI liaison to SpaceX, but claimed the other agent was not responsive. And it goes on and on and on and on. And there's other people in the circle. There's Luke Nozek. He co-founded PayPal with Max Levchin, Peter Thiel, Ken Howery. This Max Levchin character was born in Kiev, then part of the Ukrainian SSR, born to a Ukrainian Jewish family. And so then this group that has these Russian contacts and is mingling with these people. We know how Russia styles itself now, the Third Rome, the savior of conservatism, the leaders of anti-communism, the biggest fighters against the supposed Jewish world conspiracy. This is the Russian self-marketing. And then this circle, this American or American/international circle of business people, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk and these others, they kind of get influenced by the same kind of marketing that the Russians are pushing. It's called dark enlightenment. Shouldn't we have a monarchy? Shouldn't business people rule everything? Democracy has failed, blah, blah, blah. So, and so they all seem to like the writings of this character, Curtis Yarvin. And Curtis Yarvin sort of became famous.
A.k.a. Mencius Moldbug.
Moldbug, yeah, it's just kind of a stupid name, right? And he
now,
looks like a hippie. I mean, the photo we got, his public photo, he looks like a hippie, very unassuming. He looks like some housekeeper who's also a hippie, and he doesn't look regal. He doesn't look like what his, and
his writings are pro-Russian. He basically, before Ukraine was invaded, he says it's not really a country.
And I always go back to that point, because if people push ideas such as we need elitism, we need these hierarchies, and we need to give more power to fewer people, and blah blah blah, and we need to change all this and change that, and who are these people who are saying this? Are they qualified to do that, to live that? Are they themselves special in any way? Do they have new ideas? Did they make something special? Are they really good at good at these things that they claim are so important? And it seems like, Curtis Yarvin became influential and powerful, but he looks very unassuming. He looks very disappointing. And I think, to me, his writings are very disappointing, because it seems like almost as if an algorithm or a team had assembled the words that would probably work the best with the target audience. Okay? So, and it's like you can adapt the Curtis Yarvin material. You can sell that to the average activist out there. And then you can make sort of and then of course it has a different effect maybe on an audience like Elon Musk or Vice President J.D. Vance or Peter Thiel, because those guys are powerful. They're not just activists. And then of course there's this, which I believe a new version of the old Operation Trust, which was at the time of the Russian Civil War. Which was at the time of the Russian Civil War between the Reds and the Whites. This was an organization or a circle that claimed to be the best or the most relevant in anti-communism. And this was a big trap. This was a big mistake because the group was fake, or this whole thing was run by the Reds. And so we know from history that the Russians will do this. They will masquerade, they will create these organizations and then try to mingle with these Westerners. And I have a strong suspicion that there are modern versions of this, especially when a younger Vladimir Putin, who was already working for the KGB, when a young Vladimir Putin actually visited a princess in Germany, in Hessen, of all places. Again, House of Hessen. Very, very infamous name. This was actually an old Russian princess, and her family had escaped the communists. It was a wild escape, from castle to castle, and with the relatives, and finally they settled in, she came to Hessen. She married into the Metternich clan, very old family. And so she lived in this castle, this idyllic castle in Hessen, and she gets a surprise visit by a young Vladimir Putin. And this story was related, it was told like as a short, in a few sentences. The story was told in Catherine Belton's book Putin's People, because Catherine Belton had a source for that story, somebody from that family who worked in banking, I think. And I thought, well, what is this princess saying? Who is this princess really? And I found out she wrote some books, and I got those books, and it's full of this idea that there was this underground movement in Russia, even in the Soviet Union, this very conservative, this very, very supposed conservative underground movement in Russia. Always there, preserving the real Russia. The real Russia couldn't be killed by communism because the real Russia was strong enough and it lived on underground. And then, Putin supposedly was a member of this conservative underground, and Sobchak was a member of this conservative underground. And this secretive group over there, in the late stages of the Soviet Union, this underground movement, they destroyed communism over there. They actually made, so the mythology goes, they destroyed the power of the Communist Party. And so we have to work with Putin, we have to work with Sobchak, and she strongly in her books, she alludes to this fantasy, and she had the best contacts in the right wing. That was the whole point. She could pick up a phone and call up European royalty, because she was related to them, European aristocrats, business people, especially the right-wing business people, German guys who still had some Nazi sympathies and funded, some right-wing organizations. She could just call them. They loved her. They trusted her. And she had international, British contacts and American contacts. She had all the contacts in the right wing. Best contacts ever. And she gets the visit of a young Vladimir Putin, and Putin tells her the story about this supposed underground movement. And so this is kind of the bigger picture of this, what we see today, what we have now with this Dark Enlightenment and Curtis Yarvin. I mean, Yarvin, he graduated from Brown University. Okay, congrats. Then studied computer science at UC Berkeley, dropped out to join a tech company. So he supposedly worked on the so-called Urbit computer platform as a file sharing system between servers, which is not a revolutionary idea. So that's kind of his professional history. And then suddenly he thinks he's an expert on how the world should be run, on how empires function or how countries function or should function. He thinks he's like this right-wing, semi-fascist, super libertarian, super expert. And he just assembles these bits that we've seen so many years. Like this radical Ayn Rand stuff. You know, that this Ayn Rand mentality that these oligarchs are superhumans and they should run it all. Like in this one Ayn Rand novel, the Atlas Shrugged novel, when the super oligarchs, they go to the secret valley and they let the rest of the world basically rot, and they watch how it falls apart, and they live in their own super wonderland. And it's like this exaggerated cult movement, or this cult mentality of Ayn Rand and others, because we know that Ayn Rand basically created a cult around her own person. And she also she glorified some of these industrialists so hard and overlooked the severe flaws of them and the mistakes that had been made. I mean, if you want progress, whether you're building cars or you're trying to build a better future society, you have to learn from the mistakes. What were the mistakes that Henry Ford made when Henry Ford worked with the Nazis, and Henry Ford Ford, they sold technology to the Soviets, or Henry Ford worked with these crazy Russians who probably were, who were most likely Soviet intelligence, and they pushed the conspiracy mythology, which is completely false. What about all the mistakes? What about all the mistakes, and why teach people this arrogance, thereby alienating vast groups in society and make them your enemy? What the heck is the point of that? So what I'm seeing from Curtis Yarvin is a patchwork, a sort of a constellation of material that has the highest chance of really clicking with the audience, clicking with the target audience. So he's not too specific. Yeah, he says we should have an American monarch, and they should dissolve or fire all these government employees, like the Doge organization claimed to do with Elon Musk. And just, we like dictators, and we like power and apparent simplicity. Yarvin admired Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping for his pragmatic and market-oriented authoritarianism. He described what he felt were flaws in the accepted World War II mythology, alluding to the idea that Hitler's invasions were acts of self-defense. Peter Thiel was an investor in Yarvin's startup, and Yarvin has pointed to an essay by Thiel in which the latter declared, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." Venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, informal advisor to Donald Trump, has spoken approvingly of Yarvin's thinking. Steve Bannon read and admired his work. Vice President J.D. Vance has cited Yarvin as an influence. It has been suggested that the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, bears resemblance to RAGE, which is also an acronym, as advocated for by Yarvin. So, did they learn nothing, Jeff? Did they learn nothing from these grave mistakes that past industrialists made? like financing
Yeah.
fascists in Germany because they think, oh, this is going to save us from the communists, and then they finance the Nazis, and there were such big mistakes. And then we see Elon Musk publishing things saying that the AfD party will save Germany. From what exactly? From what type of conspiracy exactly? And how is the AfD going to do that? What is the personnel of the AfD? How much does Elon Musk know about the personnel of the AfD?
Yeah, there's multiple strands of manipulation of people who control billions of dollars, who have political influence. Look at the vice president is a person who has a relationship with Peter Thiel. This is known. There's these investment funds on the West Coast. Some of them may be tied to China. You've got the Chinese so-called defective billionaire whose name escapes me right now. Miles Guo, right?
Oh, yeah.
Miles Guo, who's been financing Steve Bannon, another one of these Trump, circus follow-on acts. Bannon is of course, it's funny, a lot of these people profess to a kind of Catholic background, which is what Nick Land, as a sponsor of Mencius Moldbug, aka Curtis Yarvin, is advancing. Dark Enlightenment refers to a rejection of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment, just to give a historical context, was people were sick of 200 years of Protestants and Catholics killing each other, burning each other at the stake, garroting each other, killing each other. Civil war in France, off and on between the Protestants and Catholics in Germany, the 30 Years' War in Germany. Terrible wars. You had the trouble in England where Catholics were burned, and in Spain they were burning heretics and Protestants, and so this was a religious persecution was a serious thing, and it's one of the reasons why the U.S. Constitution, which is an Enlightenment document, and as well as our Declaration of Independence, said, talks about the pursuit of happiness, and there's a separation of church and state, right? Congress will not establish a religion as the state religion, as has existed in so many countries. I think this was wise because once you establish a religion, the people who don't belong to that religion are alienated from the state, and then you have the potential. You have almost an existing civil war situation. We have that with Muslims who realize, really serious Muslims, not nominal Muslims, who take the Quran seriously, that you can't swear allegiance to the Constitution and be a true Muslim, because your allegiance is to the Ummah, is to the Islamic nation.
Yeah, and the way they think a society should be run.
The law is the law of the Prophet Muhammad. It is not a secular. You can't have a secular constitution if you're a true Islamist, right? And so therefore you get the assassination of Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan, and you've got them changing the Turkish Republic back. This is what Erdogan is doing in Turkey. He's really an Islamist who is moving Turkey. He's kind of taken the army away from the army, was protecting the republic. Ataturk had formed it. We don't want to be a Muslim republic. We don't want to be the Sultanate anymore. The secularization was an important step for Turkey, but it's being undone, and you see this happening all over the place. You had for a while the trend in the Arab world was Arab National Socialist states like the Syrian state or Egypt. The Arab Socialist republics. These are not Islamic. Yasser Arafat was another gay person, by the way.
Yeah,
his group was communist.
When obviously the left was commenting on this group, the PayPal Mafia, Thiel, Musk orbit, And so sometimes, of course the interpretations by the left are predictable and they're just too simplistic, but even sometimes they actually
they hold to their own ideology. They don't want to get into the complexities of this is a strategy. Ideology is for the stupid, strategies for the smart, right?
And it's like when you see these reactions from different sides, I mean, it's like the people usually are a little bit smart when it comes to criticizing the other group, but they're not even good at that. And they're terrible at judging the own group that they're a member of. Mm-hmm. I mean, so this is like when people started to comment on this group, and they said, well, I mean, it's not just elitist, it's also a bit eugenicist. It's also a bit it smells like eugenics, because the left argument goes,
Planned Parenthood was a eugenicist, right?
Yeah, and so
leftist, here you have these leftists who support it, like Hillary Clinton supports Planned Parenthood and stuff.
So completely,
and of course, the person who founded it, by the way, didn't like black people.
So if the right wing smells like eugenics, they complain, but they don't complain about their own sordid history with eugenics. Right. And by the way, there's a much larger history of the left and eugenics. This was even before the total Nazi takeover in Germany. Social Democrats, I kid you not, before the Nazi era, before the Nazi dictatorship, this is when. Before the Nazis, this is when, in Europe, when social democrats, leftists, would fancy the idea of eugenics. A lot of them, Sweden, Germany, other places, they were pushing eugenics ideas because they found it very, very fancy. But nobody's supposed to remember that. Nobody's supposed to know that. But here we are, leftists saying, this group, this Thiel, Musk, blah, Trump admin, JD Vance, RFK Jr., this smells like eugenics because they don't want the average person to have affordable healthcare. Healthcare becomes too expensive, and so the poorer people, they die first, or they get sick first, and they can't get fixed, and also. When these right-wingers, these conspiracy guys, when they push nonsense, I mean exaggerated nonsense about basic vaccines, and say this is where the big conspiracy is, this is what's causing it all, this we found the total solution, we solved the riddle, we have the biggest sensation, and then they point at some baseline vaccines as kind of the big conspiracy. The leftist argument goes, by telling people to not get vaccinated, these poorer right-wingers, they get sicker and they die more frequently. So it's almost like a right-wing eugenics, right-wing eugenics program that doesn't care if the people that die are left, right, or middle, or libertarian. Because if you can't afford expensive healthcare, you're out of luck. And so but I mean, there's like I think like a Randian, like an Ayn Rand element to this, maybe. It's like this detached mentality of some super rich people when they think that, well, if you have trouble with money, if you are in trouble, it must be totally your own fault, and it's never anybody else's fault, and nobody has any responsibility of helping anybody who's in trouble. This is kind of like this social Darwinism thing that I saw a lot of Ayn Rand fans that they adopted. And of course, this social Darwinism mentality, this is fuel to the fire of the communists, because then the communists can point at these weirdos, these right-wingers and libertarians, and say, look, it's exactly what we told you they are. They want poor people to die. They don't care about poor people. They're just monsters. And it's all about money to them. and favoritism and elitism, and almost nobody is up there. Almost nobody is part of the top 5% or top 1%. So huge issue. But as you said, the left had a eugenics strain, heavy one. You mentioned Planned Parenthood and just pushing abortion like crazy, like it's the hottest product on the market. But there's also the whole history when the Social Democrats were into eugenics, and also I think the Soviet system and the Chinese system had the communist Chinese system. They all had a practical eugenics program, and I think it's been overlooked because they had a selection process. Who was going to go to the gulag? Who was going to die? When the Chinese set fixed numbers and said we need X amount of people out of 1,000 statistically to die, to get killed, and the Soviets, they had to decide who goes to the gulag and who doesn't, and they made certain distinctions. And if you had a rebellious personality, or if you had a sense of heroism and empathy, if you were really standing up for your fellow man, you would go to the gulag, you would get killed. And so they could almost breed out certain characteristics. I mean, people have commented on this for a long time, that the Russians, for 1,000 years or more, that the Russians, they will accept anything that's being done to them, right? The Russian soul, we always suffer.
The Russian people, yeah.
Yeah, the Russian soul, we always suffer, and we just take it and go on. It's like, because there's nobody, I mean, genetically, I mean, they've changed.
The suffering is good, right?
Yeah, they've changed over the centuries. I mean, apparently everybody's just going along, and nobody's left anymore who has the mentality
to resist, to say no.
Yeah.
That when you're crossing my borders, you're telling me that I have to go and be cannon fodder. And literally, they use the troops as cannon fodder. They don't train them properly to be soldiers who can have an even chance on the battlefield. They go, here's your weapon, there's the machine gun, you go storm it now, and you have like a 1 in 100 chance to survive. It's like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, your average duration of survival in battle is like 11 minutes or something, or maybe a day.
Very violent. It's a very violent thing. I mean, they've lost over 1 million men dead and wounded. Well over 1 million now.
Do you think that? It's a huge issue when, let's say, characters like Peter Thiel or Elon Musk and some of these others? Do you think it's a problem that they never really saw battle up close? They never served in the military. They were maybe too privileged. I mean, Elon will tell you 6 Ways to Sunday that he was kind of broke in college and whatnot, but and his father wasn't so rich as people say he was, and he didn't get much money from his father. But still, success happened very quickly to these people, and then it's all about, we can afford anything.
Well, I think it's
detached
general
from reality?
in America. I think it's Americans in general, Westerners may be detached from reality in general. There's a kind of a fantasy world that we live in. And I think TV has promoted that partly because it's a reality better than reality. And it's the fact there's no draft. There's no passage into manhood. And the libertarian ideology feeds this, because the libertarian ideology, it's like you found freedom in the bottom of a Cracker Jack box, and now it's yours forever. You don't have to fight for it. You don't have to. It wasn't that men had to bleed and die. They didn't have to endure a winter at Valley Forge to get your freedom. This concept that freedom has to be won all the time. Each generation has to win it, either intellectually by great effort here, or by blood on the battlefield. That is lost to them. They think, well, I have money and I have a right to it. And they have a kind of libertarian anarchism was the thing, back 40 years ago when I would go to these libertarian dinners and they would call me a savage because I believed that there should be an army and police. That because we can have private police, so your private police are gonna go to war against each other because you haven't gotten away from the state. This is where this monarchy business of Nick Landis, it's the libertarian anarchist, is the guy with all the money to buy all the guns.
Yeah, and first they say
warlord.
Yeah, exactly. First they will argue with you that anything can be done in the form of a private business, even warfare. And of course it's absurd if you think that especially in war times, you need to have order, you need to have control, and sometimes you have to force people to do something. It's not possible that anything can be done with bartering and agreeing on a price. And so first they try that on you. They will say everything can be done with business mechanics. But then when, first of all, they never get anywhere in politics. They never gain any political power whatsoever, even though there's many libertarian successful business people and they have lots of money. But they
Ron Paul and Rand Paul's a senator.
But they never gain any political power because they say we hate political power, so nothing ever changes, and it's just they're wasting their time, nothing changes. So then they get frustrated.
It's like the old Confederacy. It's like the old Confederacy. We believe in secession so that people secede from them.
And they get so frustrated.
I'm seceding from society, so I don't owe society anything. I mean, what are you kidding?
Yeah.
You're all going to be run separately.
And then they say, oh, by the way, we actually believe that for the foreseeable future, for an intermediary time slot, we need a monarchy. We need actually an aristocratic dictatorship. I mean, it's the same as the left. The left would say, oh, it's all about liberating and nobody will have any major, no big private property anymore. We just liberate everybody. But then it's the message changed to, well, we do need a dictatorship, but it's just for a while. But then it's forever. They say we need a dictatorship for a while and then there's going to be perfect communism and everybody loves it. And the libertarians, they say, well, we need a dictatorship for a while, a monarchy, and then we have perfect freedom and zero government. Which is not really believable. And even if you make the argument, especially in wartime, for a pragmatic dictatorship, it still depends on who's doing it and how you're doing it. These people, these ideological people, they always argue principles, just words. And they never talk about, okay, how are we going to make sure that this is going to work? How do we make sure that we pick the right people? And how do we eliminate mistakes? This is how we analyzed the dangers of our ideas. This is how we try to mitigate them. It's that they're never convincing about actually pulling things off and being professional about it. They just have gimmicks and they say, well, there's no alternative because our gimmick, and it can't go wrong because our gimmick, and the dangers, we can mitigate all these dangers because of our gimmicks, and that's it then. And it becomes such an easy thing for people on the web to just repeat things, whether you're a radical crazy libertarian or a radical super right-winger, imagined anti-communist hero against the windmills of Zion, no matter what you pick, or your cause is being an eco-warrior. Doesn't matter. You can pick a cause, you just repeat these stupid sentences, and you think you are virtuous. You think you're doing something. You think you're fighting evil. And it's always about these words. And I think this is what attracts the worst people to these ideologies, because responsible people or smarter people, they are cautious and they will be more meticulous, and they're more about results and who to trust and being trustworthy themselves and looking at a track record. It's not just about empty words, but there's a lot of people out there who love empty words because they think that that's all they can do. They would never admit to that, but it's all they can do. And so they think they can gain a price by repeating sentences, and they can gain status by just repeating words. And they're going to be not a poor peasant in this new right-wing system. No, they're going to be somebody who's comfortable. They're not going to be a peasant or a worker, not enjoying life whatsoever. But mathematically, you're going to be a peasant. You're going to have nothing.
Well, that's the thing is these people, it's a competition over power and political power. James Burnham once said politics is about three things. It's about power, it's about power, and it's about power. So I think, have we covered everything?
Yeah, I think these two topics that we spoke about, they really blend with each other. They belong together, because you don't see military action without this
subversion.
Subversion to gather support in order to have more boots on the ground at a later stage, or more people to make.
Well, you're undermining you're dividing and conquering the West. It's the most obvious divide and conquer there is. The people that used to be for strong military defense were on the right, and now they sound like leftist hippies from the 60s.
Exactly.
That's what they sound like. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This has been another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist, and my co-host Alex Benesch in Germany. Hope you'll join us next week.